just yeah, it's just exactly 12:30 now, so we'll be kicking off, and I see lots of people coming in now onto the webinar, so you're all welcome. And we can talk a little bit more about the weather. It's fantastic in Galway. I hope it's good wherever you are. So as people are coming in, I just want to try and introduce to you. I want to introduce you to the webinar. The webinar's title is how to develop high performing managers. My name is John Raftery, and the webinar is hosted by Leap. Now, I am a senior consultant with Leap. Leap have been in business for over 25 years, delivering leadership development and management training. We're based in Galway, but we work throughout the country. And because we're 25 years in business, we must have delivered to lots of different industries and businesses right across the country. Probably some of your own businesses from the participants that are here today. The topic today, as I said, is how to develop high-performing managers. It's very pertinent because today's world is very uncertain for lots of reasons. But I was reading recently that with the advent of artificial intelligence, there's doubt about the future of knowledge workers. Okay, so now they're saying that the managers of the future, and in fact, I would have said managers of today and the past, need what's known as the 5 C's. And the 5 C's are communication, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, and the difficult one about cultural awareness. So hopefully some of those issues of how to develop high-performing managers, Tricia is going to touch on today. So I want to introduce the panel today. Our expert presenter is Tricia Cunningham. She's a founding partner with Leap. She's been with Leap over 25 years, obviously from the very start. And she is at the front line of learning and development in Ireland. And I would say, and I know Tricia will smile at this, she is one of Ireland's experts in the whole area of learning and development. Prior to that, she worked in the corporate sector. She's an MSc in training and development, and currently works across universities, the healthcare sector, private hospitals, and large hotel groups. I don't know if hopefully Coleman is here. Coleman is one of our expert panelists. Coleman, again, has over 25 years in management consultancy and leadership development. He's the founder of Collins and McNicholas, one of Ireland's leading recruitment agencies. Prior to that, he worked with Nortel Networks, and I can attest to Coleman's great recruitment skills because he hired me when I was a young man many years ago, and it had a profound effect on my career. He's also the author of How to Succeed in Your First Job, an excellent book, one that I purchased myself, not for myself, but for my daughter who started her first job. And he's a regular speaker on the topic, on that topic with colleges and universities throughout the country. We were to have Jacinta Green, she was head of HR in Supermax, but Jacinta, like many HR managers, has been called away today to the WRC, an organization I'm sure you're familiar with. But in her stead, we have Julie Carroll. Julie is the Learning and Development Manager at Supermax. Again, with over 20 years experience in hospitality and operations and in the QSR area. I had to look that one up. It's quick service restaurants, a very challenging area, no doubt, to work in. Julie's expertise is in talent development. So again, very relevant to the role, to the topic we're having today. So before we start and I hand over to Tricia, just want to remind you all that on the corner of your screen or at the bottom on your toolbar, you'll find a Q&A section, okay? So we're looking for lots of feedback, we're looking for questions and so on throughout the presentation. As things pop into your head, pop in a question there and we'll put it to the expert panel at the end of Tricia's presentation, which should last about 10 or 15 minutes. And then we'll, once she's finished, then we'll open it up to the panel discussion. And hopefully you'll find the whole exercise very useful and educational. So I'm going to hand you over to Tricia Cunningham now. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thanks for that introduction, John. Of course, when he says things like over 25 years in this area, I'm like, I Can't believe it's that long. The grey hairs and the wrinkles probably will attest to that. But I do have experience in this area, and it is great to see some familiar names listed in the attendees. That's fantastic. And welcome also to those of you who I may not know, may not have met previously. What I'm hoping today that we'll just do is a discussion on this topic, because I think it's more and more relevant. Our world is a little bit unstable at the moment, so we need to focus on the things that we actually can control and we can do something about. So today, hopefully, will stimulate thought, and more than that, that will lead to some action on your part as you look to kind of address this and see what are the pieces that we can actually control and do something. Look, I put statistics up here because, hey, what good presentation wouldn't begin or include statistics along the way, but I promise I won't do any more. This is pretty significant, the survey, and you can see all of the impact that we have when we've got poor management. Poor management skills can lead, there's an impact on the actual results in the organization. The bottom line to all of this is about $8.8 trillion, they would reckon, is the cost of poor management. That's really significant. Surely, with everything that's going on and the instability, there are ways that we can find within our organizations that we can take a look at what are the controllables and what are we doing to support that controllable. If we could reduce it even or if you could reduce it even within your own organizations by even a small bit, doesn't that have a significant impact? And the bottom two, I suppose, particularly for those HR professionals, you know the importance of a really effective manager in terms of keeping the employee population, team members, enjoying their jobs, engaged with it, so the challenges of recruitment, etc., are reduced. So they're the stats, they're the reasons why, so maybe a compelling reason as to why this is an important topic that we do actually need to address. So how do we recognize then the signs of either poor performance so we can start to nip these in the buds? So a typical, if you look at the list here, these 7, we can see that the first one in terms of micromanagement, I suppose that's really around an individual's understanding of what management is about and their lack of awareness or lack of experience in understanding that there are different styles and different approaches I can take, but there is a need for the way I approach it is that micro, taking hold of something. And the other two, the next two, 2 and 3, I suppose this is really about personal effectiveness, the way that I perceive and manage myself and respond to time, etc. And the last 4 then are around personal, sorry, there's a WASP, communication or interpersonal skills. Now, if you look at all of those 7 signs that we're looking at signs of poor management, all of those are things that an individual can actually address. They're not something that's outside, that's impossible to do. They can address those. But there's not only a responsibility on the individual to do so, but there really is a responsibility on the organization as well to support the individual. And in terms of addressing poor performance and trying to create the right environment in which strong management skills can blossom, can grow. So how does an organization contribute to a manager performing poorly? Maybe you've got some ideas yourself, and again, you can put this into the question and answer section as part of the answer. But I suppose that the number of ways that we've identified, really 4 key ways. One is about the poor selection process. Sometimes what happens is organizations implement a process and it just stays rooted. It remains as is. It never changes. It's never adapting. And our world is all the time adapting and roles within organizations are changing. So the process needs to be evaluated and needs to see, is it fit for purpose anymore? Are there better ways of doing so? The second way, of course, in terms of how the organization are held responsible for it is because maybe there is lack of support for the newly appointed manager. There are so many times that we hear in terms of the work that we do with organizations, our members or people on our programs, where they'll talk about, I was basically just landed in the role. And basically, you're flying it, you know what you're doing. Maybe it's somebody who grew up in the organization, so you know what it's about, you know what it is. Or I'm newly appointed and a lot of effort goes into maybe the selection, but we don't really think about what happens when they join. How do we help them to assimilate in properly and to help them to thrive? The norms, the cultural norms and the business disciplines in the organization. So maybe the culture that's grown up is a smaller organization where everybody got stuck in and did what's needed and management were stuck in. But the organization has grown and evolved. Well, we need those norms to change. We need people who are coming out of the weeds and looking up and seeing the bigger picture and helping teams move towards that bigger picture. So the business disciplines and the cultural norms are one of the things that are getting in the way of that manager blossoming and growing, developing, thriving. And finally, the fourth area in which the organization needs to take responsibility is in terms of lack of clarity. What exactly does a good manager look like in our organization? Not in anybody else's, but in our organization. What exactly are they doing? As you look at these four elements there, you need to consider from your perspective, well, what are the elements that you can control? Or if you can't control them, what aspects of these can you influence? I'm wondering, John, if you could just throw up the poll there. I've had a few, just wondering from your perspective, which are the ones that when you look at those lists, which ones do you think are most evident in your organization? Let's take a look. If you wouldn't mind just answering these till we see what throws up from the group that are here today. Give you a few seconds. Okay, I think everybody should have made their selection at this time, John. If you want to close it, we see the results. There we go. Okay, so the strongest one there that we're seeing, we've got two tied, cultural norms of business disciplines or the lack of clarity. Yeah. And then ask yourselves, as what these are quite strong with 36%. So over a third of you, these are things that are going on in your organization. And that maybe are these things, think about how much control or how much influence that you have in relation to them, that there's something that we can do about them. Okay, thanks, John. We can close that. Great. So maybe what we're talking about here will give you ideas and what those elements that you can control and influence. So we look at these. What about the organization's responsibility? Well, the organization needs to look at two aspects in terms of creating, developing those strong managers. And the first is in the aspect in terms of the job. We need to make sure the job is really fit for purpose for what we need. I know that you will say, but we have job specs, we have them available. The job spec is going to be your description. But actually for a manager to thrive, they need the detail behind that. And they need the detail in a way that actually it resonates here and it's clear in here and it stays in here. We need to get better at drilling down, but also capturing it in a way that actually I clearly understand. I understand what am I being held accountable for, and that generally speaking, we would advise between normally around 4 to 7 max, and 7 I think is too much anyway, but 4 and 5 key accountable statements. What am I responsible for? Which of those are the greatest priority? And what's the time that I should be spending on average in a month against them? When that's aligned together, I now have a clear picture of what my job is and what's expected of me then, how you will hold me accountable or my manager will hold me accountable. That's the first thing that an organization can get straight. And then the second element has got to do with the people. We have to make sure that when we're thinking about the people, how are the people going to be aligned with that actual job description that we have, the details behind it. We need to ensure that we remove any kind of hidden bias in the process. And we all have biases about things. So we need to try as much as we can to remove it, and that it reflects the people that we're thinking about who would thrive in this role, and that we've actually given consideration to their profile. What exactly would they look like? So the solutions. The first part in taking a look at the job, and this is talking about the solution and addressing the issue around poor selection process, lack of support for the newly appointed manager, and lack of clarity. We need to drill down on that job. And an exercise that we've conducted, we do with organizations, is taking a look at what exactly is required in that job. If the job could talk, what would it say why it exists? What are all of the reasons? And you'll come up with a whole slew of reasons. It could be 45 reasons why the job exists. Well, a new manager's not going to remember the 45. But what if we could group them down, as I mentioned there, and put them down, and we have a key accountable statement. And then from that, we can do the priority and the time associated with it. Now we've got something that's comprehensive. Meanwhile, we need to do something similar in relation to the individual. When we're hiring, yes, of course, we use the traditional. We would take a look at their CVs, their experience, their qualifications, the references, all hugely important. But maybe to help ourselves, there are tools out there that can help you even further. And maybe some of those tools, like the psychometric tools, are another tool to add to. They don't take over. They're not the only tool that we use. But if we can use them to supplement, now we've got a really comprehensive profile of what we're looking for, exactly what's needed, and we know what the job is about. Now we've got a much better match together. We need to begin when we're talking about, and you reference that this is one of the strongest ones in terms of the challenges that you're seeing the impact right now. We need to begin asking the question then, what are the obstacles to effective performance right across the organization? What are some of those business disciplines that have crept in that are preventing managers from succeeding and being contributing in the way that we need them to contribute? What are some of the cultural norms, the behaviors, and many of these are not explicit, but they're implicit, and therefore they tend to have that negative impact. So perhaps some of these will sound familiar to you. Maybe some of the norms that have crept in and the poor disciplines in terms of we're reluctant or we don't like to give feedback. We don't do it. Sure, they know? Or we say it in an indirect way. Maybe the cultural norms within your organization is we avoid having the difficult conversation. And to be honest with you, that's something that's keeping up more and more. It's appearing with in our training sessions. People reluctant to have that difficult conversation with individuals. Nervous, you probably as HR professionals will know, nervous, will I say the right thing or the wrong thing in our world today? And so therefore I'm better off not having the conversation at all. But of course that doesn't sort it out. That's not helping that manager to grow and develop, not helping them to have the impact that they need to have. Maybe in terms of some of the things that we're finding is that there's poor problem-solving skills. Reaching a blockage and not figuring out. I think this is probably a skill that's going to be, well, it needs to be and will be stretched a little bit in these economic times at the moment as organizations are trying to find responses to what's coming down the track. Decision-making. Poor decision-making, not being able to clarify exactly how did we reach a decision and therefore justify why it's the right one, or unpick it as to why it might not be the right one. And maybe what we're seeing is people not embracing performance management. Maybe you've experienced it where people are viewing this as it's a tick box exercise and it's an imposition on management, instead of it being a tool to support them. Because performance management, as you well know, it's not about a half year, I have to fill in a document every half year. We have to sit down and have. Performance management is a whole year long. And it is about providing that feedback. It is about those ongoing conversations. So in terms of taking a look at this, we need to recognize that culture is really important. Culture is developed through the values. And you recognize the values of an organization through the behaviors that you're seeing. So organizations need to get back and understand what exactly are our values. So therefore, what the conversations, how you can influence is, what are the behaviors we want to see? And therefore, they're linked to those values. Organizations sometimes make the mistakes of the values and they come up with 10 or 12 statements and they look fantastic and they're on a board, an entranceway into reception, or they're on our website. But if they're 8 or 10, how many of them am I going to remember? And therefore, do we really live them? If I don't remember them, they're not going to get reflected in my behaviors. So what we need to do is bring it down, distill it down. What are the core values that are so important to our organization, that they're instilled in all of our meetings? We're referencing to them. When I'm having conversations with my employees, I'm bringing them in. Not as I have to tick this box, but I'm using them to drive the right behaviors in the organization. Explicit values provides that clarity. It's saying it's clearly to individuals, this is the way that we want to work. When they become that implicit, they're based on assumptions. And then those assumptions often reflect the behaviors that we don't want to see. And those behaviors, once they become in, you know it, once they take a hold, they're very hard then to unpick them, to pull them away from the ways in which we do our business. So culture is really important. These are the things that we need to start looking at to try and address so we get the right people. And my last point, you'd be glad to hear, my last slide, my last reference to you is, we need to get it right in hiring the right people. But when we have them in there, we need to set them up for success. It is about providing that clarity, agreeing on the expectations. It is then about identifying when we know what the expectations are, we know what the person is like, we've done the process in terms of hiring correctly. Where are the gaps? What can we do to narrow those gaps? It's also that manager, it's about them getting feedback, monitoring performance and giving them feedback. That's holding them accountable. And as I've said there, accountability isn't a dirty word. Accountability means that when I'm doing something right and doing a really good job, I get the praise, I get the recognition for it. But also accountability is when I'm not doing well. It's said in a way that I can hear it, so I can figure out what I need to do differently so I can grow and develop. And anybody in a role, we want them to develop. If I come into the role and I'm fully developed, I'm going to be bored. And then you've got a bigger problem in your hands. In terms of giving the feedback, it allows you to measure results, to measure employee satisfaction, assess impact, and assess then the key skills that are needed. And then the last thing in terms of getting it right, it's about motivating the manager, motivating that person based on their strengths. So they want to remain with you and they want to remain and contribute even further. So I'm hoping that what I've given you today is some food for thought, and more than that, that you start to think about, well, how do I translate this from food for thought into actual actions? How can I bring that back into my organization? So there we go, some ideas. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Tricia. Thank you very much. That was very insightful and interesting. I'm just going to check here now for some Q&A. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions here. The first question, maybe I'll put to you, Coleman. What can HR do to ensure that the performance management system is an integral part of staff development rather than a tick box exercise to appease HR? It's a very common question. I'll hand it over to yourself, Coleman.
Okay, John, that certainly is a key question, and it's often how well that process works indicates how highly HR is valued in an organization, and really is HR an integral part of the management team and a key player at the top table. So I think if the performance management system, as Tricia said, it's not just a performance appraisal system that happens once a year. It's something that happens every day of the working week. But if it's not working well, I think it's incumbent on HR to step up and ensure that it does. And one of the ways of doing that is get the management team on side as to the importance of the whole performance management process, and try and you know, again, it's interesting to look at the survey results that came in from the audience. They were saying a lack of clarity on roles was one of the things. Well, I mean, HR should be to the fore in ensuring such clarity is forthcoming, and that objectives are clear, that KPIs are clear. But again, I think one of the reasons why, as Patricia said, some of the reasons why HR doesn't do so good a process is the tick box exercise is that performance management is seen as performance appraisal, and performance appraisal, unfortunately, by nature of it, it tends to focus on what the employee did in the past year. That should only be a small part of it. That's historical. Looking at the importance of objectives, what's important that the employee does in the next year, and have that agreed very clearly between the employee and between the manager. And equally so, if we're talking about retention of people, and we're saying people are our greatest resource, what are we doing on the other part of the appraisal process on the whole issue of career goals and career objectives? And how big a part is that of the appraisal process? So I think HR has to take a hands-on role in this. Otherwise, it'll just be a rating thing where someone gets graded. It has to fit into a bell curve as to what the norms are for performance. That's a totally negative view of it. And if I see an organization that has that type of process in place, I just think HR isn't stepping up to the mark and isn't really represented at the top table. So I think selling the idea to managers, if necessary, modeling how conversations, we're talking about difficult conversations, modeling how these conversations take place. Clearly people do avoid them. So modeling them and role playing them, things like that. Managers might be reluctant to put their hand up and say they need that assistance, but I think if it's offered, it would be a well worthwhile exercise. So this comes back to the whole issue of stepping up and being a member of the senior team and striking a balance between a concern for people and a concern for results. And I think HR is a key player. Up after the CEO, see it as the key player in ensuring that these type of cultural norms and values, objectives are all delivered on.
Thank you, Coleman. That's a very comprehensive answer, I must say. I don't know if Julie or Tricia want to add to that while I just look up, see what the next question is. There's another question here and Julie, I'll put this one to you. Actually, it does specify Supermax, so it is appropriate for yourself. What is the one skill or area you believe will be critical for Supermax in planning for the future?
I think people skills and the ability to talk to each other is probably at the top of our agenda, really, in terms of what we're trying to deliver. I think you mentioned right at the outset about there's a concern out there that artificial intelligence is going to, maybe bring us in a different direction in terms of the need for people and the need for people's skills. But I think that's probably our most critical skill to have at this point. We can absolutely utilize, and we do utilize, technology in as many ways as we possibly can to make the lives of our managers and our teams easier and more engaging and more enjoyable in their day-to-day. But there isn't anything that's ever, in our view at least, going to replace that ability to talk to your customer like they're the same as your employee, like they're your family member. That's super important for us. And it's all of those associated skills then, kind of touching on what Coleman said there in relation to performance appraisal and performance review and those conversations. I think we can't replace that ability in a manager to be able to sit down and maybe have that difficult conversation, maybe tell someone that there's some information that they don't really love to hear, but to present them with the opportunity to improve on something, or the opportunity to be rewarded for already improving a performance or already excelling at a particular thing. So the overall ability to speak to each other and to give what we can only give from a human perspective, I think is where we're at top of the organization.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. That's excellent, because I was surprised to read that the managers of the future would require people management skills because of artificial intelligence. I think managers from the very beginning have always required people management skills, and in fact it should have been the key. It is the key requirement if you're a manager. So thanks for that, Julie. So just anything else from anybody else? The next question.
John, I was going to say, the whole people management skills is even more important now, because
Yeah,
In this working from home model or hybrid model that we
that's
have,
true. Yeah.
you probably don't have these water cooler moments that you used to have in a 5-day week situation. You don't have the kind of informal kind of chats that you have in the canteen and things like that. So the ability to have meaningful conversations whenever people are in the office becomes even more important. And even the ability to even communicate maybe awkward things in an online situation is hugely important. So I would just say the importance of those skills since COVID is much more pronounced than it was before.
Yeah, thank you, Coleman. That's I totally agree with you. And I suppose there is a concern about maybe the younger generation in terms of how they communicate. Telephone conversations I believe have disappeared. It's all done by text. I know from my own children. That's it. Yeah. So thanks for that.
Even John, just
Right,
adding what's been said there. We've worked with an organization and they've recognized that the people that they're hiring in, the way in which they communicate is so different that they've actually incorporated in their induction and really going back to basics, even though they're hiring people who are a little bit, they're not straight out of secondary school, they're graduates, so they have a little bit more experience in life. But they're still teaching them that in the induction, they're walking through the basic skills of, how to look somebody in the eye in a comfortable and meaningful way, how to greet somebody, how to respond to, how to say hello. It sounds like such basic things, but it's just that people have gotten, again, Coleman, the hybrid, what's required is different nowadays. People have been doing it, gotten used to things like sending just the messages and not doing the other. And when you're managing people, you've got to be able to move out of a screen. You've got to be able to talk to people effectively. So this is kind of like a requirement, and that, you might be saying, oh, that's only the graduate, but when they become managers, if you haven't built those skills in, they're not going to be very good at managing that communication process. And it's probably one of the most important interpersonal communication skills, probably the most important skills for a manager that they need to have. Then the others we can build on, but if you don't have them as a foundation, it really is trouble.
Yeah, thanks, Tricia. Absolutely agree. The final question here is in relation to, and I'm going to throw this one to you, Tricia, in relation to the organizational responsibility, which of the responsibilities do you think we as HR professionals can drive and influence?
That's a good question. And my answer to that, I listed 4 of them there, 4 responsibilities. And I really do believe that you have a role to play in all 4. There are ones that you can control. Certainly the selection process, it's seen as in the remit of HR professionals. But remembering that your job in relation to that is, yes, helping create it, being the champion for it, but it cannot exist without the input of the key stakeholders. And they're the other people who are impacted by that. So it's other managers, etc. It can't just be owned by HR. HR are the ones who are the champions in driving it. And yes, they might own, but they can't own the detail of it. It has to be others having the input. So I would see that the other 3 in terms of culture, norms, etc., it ties in what Coleman was saying, about being at the table, being the decision makers, influencing what's not working, and therefore what do we need to do differently to try and address this. Culture eats strategy, as we said there and in the slides. If we don't have the right culture in which things can blossom and grow and thrive, etc., there's no what value is that strategy? You're not going to get there. So it's about owning that culture and kind of how do we drive it? Why would we drive the right ones? And that's about you influencing the other key decision makers within the organization in what tends to be the right way and what's the way that we need to move in. So all 4, they're big things, but there are practical things that you can do to try and drive them even better. They're not just vague out there, but a little bit of work is needed on them. So I would say all 4.
Okay.
Happy to discuss longer, but obviously not in a webinar.
John, can I just make one point there to amplify what Tricia says? I mean, we have a very good perspective lately on how HR is seen in big corporations back in the States. Since Trump has been elected, we've seen a rollback on diversity, equality, and inclusion. Where were HR in these big companies, when these kind of decisions were made, what they're really saying is, well, these were our values, but we've got new ones now. This is precisely the kind of nonsense that HR at corporate level, and insofar as they can influence in Ireland, push back on things like this. Because hiring people, if you just go back to trying to hire people and retain the best people, people have high values and they don't like to see these kind of regressions. And organizations will struggle to attract people and retain people if they sell out on their values so easily.
Yeah, thanks, Coleman. Actually, there's one final question. Another one has come in here, and it's something actually that I see all of the time. It's the question is, how do you ensure all managers are trained and getting upskilled regularly while balancing the workload and managing the costs when you're in a large organization? And maybe I'll throw that one to you, Julie.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, Supermac's a very large organization, and we have lots of managers and lots of employees at different levels. And it's a significant challenge to try and ensure that everyone is trained and trained sufficiently. We do leverage our online learning platform to really give people the basis of information for whether it be an operations function or whether it be a management function. And then we try and utilize that baseline of knowledge to top up in different ways. We tend to try and keep sessions as short as we can without being too short, so that managers aren't trying to organize their time away from the store for long periods or away from the store for multiple days. And then on top of that, the area manager and the top-down structure is a really important part of that too. Managers can get very bogged down in the day-to-day or in the challenges that are presented in their own restaurants or in their own departments, and sometimes can allow their own development or the development of their teams to fall by the wayside or take a back seat in terms of the priorities. So it's really up to the learning and development team and the area managers to work together with the store managers to ensure that we are keeping the focus for their own benefit and for the benefit of their teams as well. In terms of cost, I think we have a good balance between paying for what we need to pay for and investing in the things that we need to invest in, because we have a good understanding of what the benefit of training and the benefit of working with external providers like Leap can bring us. We can develop lots of things in-house, and we absolutely do. We manage all of our own e-learning content, but there's expertise out there that we have to be able to leverage as well. So we try to budget sensibly, and we try to budget with experience behind us and with some tried and tested solutions. We're not afraid to try something new and different at the same time.
Excellent, thanks, Julie.
Can I just add a little bit to that? You know, that sometimes, like, we hear about that all the time in working with organizations. And the question I often throw back is, well, what's the cost of not investing in them? You know, and HR's responsibility as well to quantify that, giving really good hard facts and numbers around the cost of not doing so, whether that's about turnover, whether that's about lost productivity, whether that's about morale within the organization, because the managers are in a position where they influence on other people. You know, so if we're not investing in all of this, look at the ripple effect is going to be. Also to the cost in terms of skills. So our competitors will be moving ahead while we're falling behind. So that's how we try and influence. We use the hard facts and hard information. And as Julie points out, we then try to leverage all of the tools that are available to us, whether that is the online, the e-learning that's forming the basis and topping it up, whether it's about using mentoring within the organization to support ongoing development, whether it's using external consultants to come in and to supplement it. There's lots of ways for doing it, but we see the benefits. If you don't pause and look at it, you're not going to actually reap any kind of benefits. And I quote this all of the time, but I think it's really important, because organizations say, well, we're too busy. You know, we're too busy to do that. We'd love to do it. We just don't have the time to do it. Well, and these will be my final words, I promise, and I am a windbag, but I promise these are my final words. But as Mahatma Gandhi was asked by a very successful businessman, you know, who was admiring his ability, Mahatma Gandhi's ability to be so serene and so composed, etc., so wise, you know, what do I need to do to get to that? I want to progress to that level. And Mahatma Gandhi said about, you need to meditate. And he was asked, well, how long should I meditate for? And Mahatma Gandhi said 2 hours a day. And of course, a successful business person said, 2 hours? I don't have 2 hours. I can't do 2 hours a day. And so Mahatma Gandhi's response to that was, sorry, it said 1 hour a day. I stole the punchline. Oh, it's a long day. So it was asked about 1 hour a day. So Mahatma Gandhi said, that's exactly why you need to do 2 hours a day. You know, when we're in the midst of it, it's exactly the time that we need to be invested, because we can't see a way out of it unless we step back, unless we give them the tools to help us move. So we pay a little bit of the paid for the long-term gain. Apologies, I messed that one up royally.
No, that's no problem, Tricia. It's difficult to be all things to all men. Listen, Coleman, any quick comment before we wrap up?
No, I agree with those comments by Tricia.
Right.
And the other thing I'd say is, like, a very simple thing I'm sure everybody has encountered at one time or another is, so you go to great trouble to identify an excellent training program that you think everyone should go through, and guess what? Someone rings from headquarters complaining bitterly about the productivity and the service, and the boss is told, you're going to have to cancel that course, and that's when HR have to step up and say, hey, boss, this is what we identified as being essential. We can't just let the next crisis cause these things to be cancelled.
Okay, Coleman, thank you very much. And those words of wisdom, stepping up is the key component, I think, for HR professionals. So look at, guys, there was one other question actually came in. Sorry, there's one or two other questions. There's a quick one here, said, are we going to send out the recording? Yes, we will send out the recording of this to everybody. We'll be in touch with you all. And just one other thing, I just read out this: productivity is the buzzword in the retail sector at the moment. I think cost cutting and sole focus on productivity can really affect the development of soft skills in the workforce and leadership. Long term, this is going to damage the retail hospitality sector. No customer integration, no team building, no unique selling point. Yeah, I agreed with all of that. Absolutely. I think somebody is definitely on our side here regarding the need for investing in your people. So look, with that, guys, time is just about to wrap up. So I just want to thank Tricia in particular for the presentation, very insightful. I particularly want to thank Coleman and Julie for their contribution, excellent contribution. Most of all, I want to thank everybody else who attended, and I hope that you've got something useful and your knowledge has improved as a result. As I said earlier, we will be sending out an edited video, and we will be following up and just keeping in touch with everybody to ensure that we are there to support them in their journey. So again, thanks very much. Enjoy the weather, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.